Our first beginner's project for the year is how to make a scrunchie. We're all set up ready to cut out our scrunchie, but first things first, we've got our elastic. I've already cut it to the length that is mentioned in the pattern, and I am going to attach the safety pin to the end of it now because it will make that one little job a little bit easier later. So safety pin to elastic, and then I'm going to take my pattern and I'm going to cut it on the fold. So whenever you see this symbol here where the arrows point to an edge and it says place on fold, it means we need to actually fold our fabric in half and place it on the actual fold. So even though I'm using a scrap of fabric here, we're trying to be economical about the amount of fabric we use. So I'm just going to fold it to use up the least amount of fabric as I can. And if you do this every time you cut anything out, you'll actually find that you get much better usage out of your fabrics, which means you can buy less fabric or make more things from the one piece of fabric. Okay, that's looking pretty good. So the other thing to mention before we cut is you'll notice here on the edge of my fabric, I've got some lovely rainbow lines. This is actually the selvage of the fabric. It's not always rainbow, it's normally just white, but it is the finished edge of the fabric. This line here, which is the grain line, you want the grain line to run parallel to the selvage. On things like scrunchies, it's not going to make a huge difference, but when it comes to garments in particular, you really want that grain line to run parallel to your selvage to make sure that your garment will hang correctly and that the fabric will react the way we want the fabric to react. So I'm just pinning it in place. I've pinned the corners. It's a little bit windy, so I'm just going to put a little weight there on my fabric to hold it in place. If you don't have pattern weights, you can always use tins of food or clean rocks you've picked up from the garden. They don't have to be specific things. Okay, so we've got our scissors. We're going to remember this bit here on the fold is not to be cut, so we're just going to cut these three sides. Slide your scissors in underneath, cut along the side of the pattern, and try and keep your scissors to have as nice long strokes as possible because it'll mean that your cut line is much neater. All right, I'm going to finish cutting around the edges and then I'm going to come back for the next step. We have our pattern all cut out, so we can take away our pins and pop them to one side. I'm just going to place my pattern to one side. I've just folded up my excess fabric and I can use that again for another project. So I'm going to unfurl my pattern piece, fold it lengthwise, and I'm going to match up my corners and match up my two long edges. I'm going to pin along. It's always a good idea when you're pinning to pin outwards. It means that you can see your pins from any direction, which saves you a little bit of time when it comes to sewing, but most importantly it just means you can see your pins because we're going to be removing our pins as we sew. We are not going to be sewing over pins. Sewing over pins is not a great habit to get into, so we're going to avoid it from the very beginning. Okay, so we're all pinned up. We're now going to go across to the machine and stitch this one up. I'm at the machine and I've already got it all threaded up, and I just have it on a standard straight stitch with a stitch length of 2.5. So I'm going to pop it in underneath and lower my presser foot. So my needle's in the left hand position and the edge of my presser foot is 1 centimeter seam allowance. If your needle is in the center position, just measure out using a tape measure from the center outwards to make sure that you're using the correct seam allowance for the actual piece. It will help everything out. Okay, so I'm going to take away the first one, get started. A little bit of reverse to keep the beginning of the seam nice and strong. And then just feed it through nice and slowly. always just keep an eye on this edge meeting this edge of the foot, and it will help keep you nice and straight. Take your pins out as you get to them. See, I'm just using my hands to guide it through. I'm not pushing, I'm not pulling. Your machine will take the fabric through on its own. Alright, we're getting close to the end. I'm going to do a reverse at the end. Okay. And lift your presser foot, take it to the left hand side and cut off your thread. So I'm just going to use the little cutter on my machine and leave nice long tails of thread. Okay, so we're all sewn up. Now we're going to attach the safety pin and turn it on through. So I'm going to move to the other desk to show you that. So here's our sewn up tube. I'm going to take our safety pin. And I always find it's easier if I push the safety pin in through where the seam allowance is, because that way it just gives you a little bit more strength and it's not going to tear your fabric if you're using a nice fine fabric. Then we push it inside and feed it on through, and all you do is just pull the excess and it should push through fairly well. You don't want to use too heavy a fabric for a scrunchie because it ends up a bit bulky. Alright, so it all pulls through. We can take the safety pin off now. And you can see we have a tube. So now we're going to take our elastic and we're going to feed our elastic through. So whenever you feed the elastic through, what you want to make sure is that this end stays attached down here. So quite often I just take a pin or the other safety pin and pin in the edge so that that elastic's not going anywhere. Then find where the safety pin is on the inside. I'm just trying to feel for it. There it is. I'm just going to close that one up so I don't snag it. Alright, so the safety pin's here. My pin is holding my elastic down here. Keep pushing through. Now we've got our elastic out the other end. Hang on to it on the safety pin for a sec until you've grabbed both ends. I'm just going to take the pin out there, undo my safety pin. So now I have both ends of my elastic and my fabric all scrunched in the middle, which is exactly as it should be. We're going to lap the elastic over so that it crosses over a little bit. I'm just going to hold a pin, push it through so it's gone through all the layers. I'm going to go back to the sewing machine, stitch this up and do the finishing touches. So we've got our pin holding our elastic in. I'm going to slide the elastic in underneath the presser foot while the pin's still there. Then I'm going to lower the presser foot down. Doing it that way means you use the presser foot like an extra hand. It just helps you out a little bit. Slowly ease out the pin. And I'm just going to make sure everything lines up. So I'm just going to do a little bit of a reverse. Come forward. Then I'm going to lift my presser foot, spin my elastic around, hold it nice and flat again, and then I'm going to come backwards again, reverse again. You just want this nice and secure, because if your elastic breaks, you have to undo your scrunchie and that's not so fun. So just go back and forth a few times. I'm probably being overly cautious, but Just makes it a bit easier. All right, I'm just going to use the auto cut on my machine to cut the threads. If not, you could always just lift and cut the threads just as normal. Okay, so my elastic's all stitched up. I'm just going to trim off these threads and then we'll be back for the next step. We've got our elastic joined and all our threads are cut off, and so we've just got to join up our two ends. So on one side, I'm going to tuck the fabric back in on itself a little bit. It's maybe like a centimeter, if you can see that. I'm just going to hold it nice and tight and press it with my fingers. Your fingers are actually really warm, so it's kind of a quick trick to do. If you really wanted to, you could go use your iron and press it, but this works just as well. So now we've got a nice crisp folded edge with no raw edge or the cut edge of the fabric. So we're going to open that tube up and we're going to basically stuff this one inside. So I always find it's a little bit easier if you push in where the seam allowances are at the top. And then just wriggle it all in. So it's all going to sit flat here. There's going to be a nice folded edge. Just double check my back to make sure that's the same. Once I've got it all in place, you can pop some pins in to help you guide it all through. But then you can also just pop it in underneath your machine. And we're just going to do a little bit of a stitch. Do our reverse. Just got a little wrinkle there, so I'm just moving the wrinkle out with my fingers. That's it. All right. So I'm just going through all the layers at once. All right, we've got to the end, so I can lift the needle using the hand crank on the side, lift up my presser foot, take everything to the left. I'm going to use the cutter to cut again. And that's it. Just going to trim these threads up and our scrunchie's all done. I hope you enjoyed learning how to make a scrunchie. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, and next week we'll be back with another beginner's project.